Freyja, the goddess of love and war, of fertility and death, and the baddest bitch in Asgard. The first thing you should know about Freyja is that despite living in their kingdom, she's not actually an Aesir. She's really part of the Vanir, the other faction of gods within Norse mythology. She came to live in Asgard after the war between the Vanir and the Aesir, where she, along with her father and brother, were part of a hostage exchange that acted as a foundation for an uneasy alliance. Despite how she came to live in Asgard, she rose into a very influential position, often being described as standing on the same level as Odin himself, acting like a female counterpart to him. And while very few stories surrounding her as the primary character have survived into the modern day, she still stands as one of the greats, being the most frequently mentioned goddess in the Eddas. She emphasizes the importance of strong femininity, even within a very masculine culture and mythology. She embodies the power that women can wield if they so choose. So I mentioned that she came to Asgard as a hostage at the end of the Aesir-Vanir War, but now I need to speak about the others that were part of that trade. Her father, Njordr, and her twin brother, Freyr. And it doesn't confuse and irritate me at all that her and her twin brother have basically the exact same fucking name. Her mother's name is unknown, but it is suggested that her father and her mother were brother and sister. But don't let that bother you, because it does get worse. During the poem Lokasenna, while the trickster Loki is crashing out at a feast, insulting every god in attendance, after making the claim that Freyja's parents were actually siblings, he strongly asserts that Freyja also fucks her brother, to which Njordr interjects by saying, "There's nothing wrong with a woman taking a lover that isn't her husband." I've got nothing to really say to that. I just thought we'd sit on it for a moment. Because, while, yes, Loki's word isn't exactly the most trustworthy, especially during this poem, nobody exactly fucking denies it. Speaking of, she's married to a god named Odin. There's not really anything interesting to be known about him, other than the fact he often goes on long journeys, his absence leaving Freyja in deep despair. And while he's gone, she's known to weep with tears made of amber and gold. Both precious materials are heavily linked to the goddess, and a great illustration of her role in the pantheon, and her connection and embodiment of beauty. Sometimes Freyja herself would journey out in order to bring her husband home. It's on these travels, across many nations and among various different peoples, that she's collected her many names, much like Odin when he travels. With her husband, Freyja has two beautiful twin daughters, named Hnossa and Yasemi, their names meaning jewel or treasure, to illustrate just how precious they are to her. Now I should mention that a lot of modern depictions have her married to Odin, and as the mother of Balder. For example, I think the most recent God of War games had her as such. This is incorrect, but there is some precedent for the idea. It wasn't just pulled out of someone's arse like a lot of Marvel's ideas. It's theorized that Freyja and Frigg, Odin's actual wife, are evolutions of the same ancient Germanic goddess. And whilst Frigg does not carry any of Freyja's warlike attributes, they both share a connection to motherhood and femininity, both being evoked for purposes of fertility and childbirth, often at the same time. And looking at her husband, the only thing he's actually known for is going on long bouts of wandering across the world, which is exactly Odin's favourite pastime. But ultimately, those are just theories. And when it comes to the generally accepted idea of Norse mythology, and from the time period I'm drawing from, Freyja and Frigg are two different, distinct goddesses. There's literally points in the Eddas where they are standing in the same room together and talking to or about one another. So, whilst depicting Freyja as Odin's wife isn't really right, it's not complete bollocks either. You know, it's not like, I don't know, you made Thor and Loki brothers or something. That would just be silly. It's not just Frigg though. There are a few other goddesses theorized to be Freyja under a different name or title. These being Gefjun, another goddess of fertility and agriculture, as well as Gudr, her brother's wife, and Skadi, her father's wife, which is disturbingly vindicating to some of Loki's claims. But these links are really weak, based solely on one or two similarities. The only theory with any actual weight is Frigg. Like pretty much every other god, Freyja doesn't have any kind of physical description. But considering her name Freyja means lady or noblewoman, it would make a lot of sense for her to have light hair. Because in old Viking culture, having lighter hair was a sign of nobility, darker hair being for much lower classes, such as thralls. We do know that she is extraordinarily beautiful, which is probably why every other story within Norse mythology is of some Jotun enacting some scheme to force her into marriage, something she always vehemently disagrees with, usually with threats of violence. And though she always resists these rather aggressive advances, she's no prude either. During the same rant I spoke about earlier, along with fucking her brother, Loki accuses Freyja of sleeping with just about every other god and elf within the hall, including himself. And these claims aren't exactly unfounded. She demonstrates similar levels of lust to her male counterparts, taking several lovers outside of her marriage. But she's also known to trade with sex. Which brings me to her affinity for pretty things. Whether it be precious jewels or a handsome face to sit on, she is willing to do whatever it takes to get what her heart desires. These traits are what cement her as a goddess of love, passion, and beauty. But she's also affiliated with the other side of that particular coin, war and death, which leads me to the possibility of her being the leader of the Valkyria, the choosers of the slain, a band of psychopomp warrior women who retrieve the souls of those who fall in battle. It's said that she leads the Valkyria across battlefields to pluck up the slain, and whilst the Valkyria carry half of the dead to Odin and his great hall, Valhall, Freyja collects the other half and takes them to her heavenly meadow, Folkvanga, and to her large beautiful hall, Sesrumnir, where the warriors presumably eat, drink, and fight in preparation for Ragnarok, much like in Valhall. Though, with Freyja, they might be doing some other things as well. This is why one of her names, Valfreyja, means Lady of the Slain. I should mention that the idea of her taking half of the dead for herself to her own hall is a little bit iffy. It's only mentioned in one poem of the Poetic Edda, and its wording is a little bit open to interpretation. It's possible that Sesrumnir was just another name given to Valhall for whatever reason. Norse poems can get a little bit flowery in their wording, and it can get a bit confusing. But if you disregarded everything in Norse mythology that was mentioned like a single time in passing, then you'd be throwing out basically 70% of the entire mythology. So ultimately, it's up to your own personal tastes, and like I said, interpretation. It's also worth noting that the name of her hall, Sesrumnir, also appears in a list of ship names in the Prose Edda, which is interesting when you consider the idea of stone ships, an early burial custom in Scandinavia where a gravesite is surrounded by stones in the shape of a longship. And adding on to the fact that her father was the god of the ocean and seafaring, and the fact that her brother also has a ship, his called Skifbladsnir, perhaps as a way of distinguishing it from Valhall, says Rumnir, which means something along the lines of place of many seats, isn't actually a mead hall, and instead a longship sitting in the middle of a beautiful flowery field. I don't know if there's anything in the old lore to really back that up, but it's just something to think about, and I really do like the image. Another interesting aspect to her is her caring nature. Apparently, she is one of the easiest gods to contact as a mortal. She has a real fondness for love songs, and is said to be the one to contact concerning matters of the heart. And if the love you feel is meant to be, she will help the romantic story along. I already talked about how her husband's prolonged absences would drive her into deep sorrow, so perhaps her hopeless romantic tendencies are the reason for that. Part of the reason why she might be so easy to reach and so eager to assist when called upon is because when she arrived in Asgardr alongside her father and brother, Odin appointed the men to be priests of sacrifices and Freyja to be priestess of sacrificial offerings, basically making her responsible for communications between man and the gods. And eventually she becomes solely responsible for all offerings made to the gods. In the poem Vluspo en Skama, one of the few stories that surround Freyja as a protagonist, she claims to possess a boar called Gullinbursti, created for her by two dwarves named Dane and Nabi. Which is odd, because Gullinbursti is the name of the boar created by two other dwarves, Brokr and Sindri, as part of a bet with Loki and later given to Freyr, Freyja's brother. Now, I don't know what the scholarly explanation for this is, but I don't think the boar that Freyja rides in this poem is the same one that was given to her brother. She could just be lying about it, but I think there's another explanation. The poem Voluspa and Skama is about Freyja and her devoted worshipper and possible lover, Ottar. After he builds a shrine for her, Freyja decides to help Ottar in uncovering his lineage, so that he may prove himself of noble blood and gain an inheritance. To do this, Freyja raises a witch from the dead, and this witch immediately chastises Freyja for bringing Ottar along with her on the road of the dead. But Freyja tells the witch she is mistaken, that her only companion is the glowing boar that she rode thereon, Gullinbursti. But it's commonly accepted that this gilded boar that she's pointing to is Ottar in disguise, and it seems the witch isn't fooled, because for the rest of the poem, while talking about Ottar's lineage, she is speaking to him directly. So I reckon that the gilded boar Freyja rides in this poem is actually Ottar disguised as her brother's boar. Maybe the dwarves that she name drops are the ones who created the disguise. Maybe she just pulled the names out of her ass. I don't know. It's also possible that Freyja's boar actually has a different name, Hildisvini. This is the name given to it in a separate version of the poem, instead titled Hindrljod. It's thought that Voluspa and Skama might be a couple of poems stitched together. The story of Ottar, and a telling of Ragnarok from the original Voluspa, which might explain some of the confusion. Another explanation could be that Gullinbursti is just what you call a glowing boar with golden bristles. The name literally means golden whisker. And maybe Hildisvini is the actual name of the boar. Supporting this is the fact that her brother's boar is also seen to have an additional name, Slidutani. So maybe Gullinbursti is actually just what you call that type of boar, as opposed to being its actual name. But the point is, Freyja is sometimes accompanied by or seen riding a glowing boar with golden bristles, and this boar might be a disguised human devotee and possible lover of the goddess. Which, seems like a pretty good gig, as far as I'm concerned. But boars are not the only animal in connection to Freyja. She also has 2 cats that pull a chariot that she rides in. I don't know if these are very large cats or normal-sized house cats. There's very little information on them. But I choose to believe the latter because it's a very funny image. If you look them up on the internet, you may find various names for these felines, but in the Prose Edda, the only source in which they actually appear, they aren't given names, so any names you do see are later, possibly modern additions. So Freyja doesn't have any signature weapons of any kind. The stories she's part of seem more focused primarily on aspects of love and passion. But I don't think she really needs a blade, because she's a very talented Seidkona, a practitioner of Seidr, the magic of Norse mythology. Usually this magic is wielded by using a staff or a wand, but she isn't described as having anything like that in the Eddas. In the 13th century poem Njala Saga, there is a mention of Valfreyja's staff, but this is something that came much later and isn't given much detail. There's very little examples in the surviving stories of her actually using sorcery, but she is attributed as being the one to have brought Seidr to Asgard, and to be the one to have taught the gods how to use it. So, presumably, if push comes to shove, she is more than capable of defending herself with spells and divination. There's no definitive description of what her Seidr is capable of. Often it is described as something used to foretell and shape the future, Freyja being described as a Volva, or a seeress. But seeing and meddling with fate is more Freyg's thing. To me, Seidr seems kind of limitless. She's seen raising the dead and affecting the environment, and when wielded by other gods, Seidr is able to heal as well as harm, able to curse and bind foes, or aid and invigorate allies, and even seduce lovers. So, as a master of Seidr, she must be capable of some pretty impressive feats, even if the Eddas fail to show it. The only hint of a power that we get is in a poem titled Thrym Thritha. She becomes so angry at Thor and Loki for suggesting that she marry a Jotun king that all the halls in Asgard shake at her wrath. So she's clearly powerful, enough so to back down even the defender of Asgard himself. But though she needs no weapon, that's not to say she's without any interesting trinkets. Around her neck hangs one of her most prized possessions, a necklace or torque called Brisingamen. She obtained this fancy jewellery from 4 dwarven craftsmen, and in exchange she spent at least one night in each of their beds. With part of its name meaning fire, amber, or glowing, it's likely that this necklace is several amber gems set in shining gold, which I guess kind of means that it's a necklace made out of her own tears, which is a little bit odd and somewhat poetic in a forlorn way. It's most probably imbued with some sort of enchantment or power, but there's no explicit mention of what it is. Perhaps it just enhances her magic in some way, or provides some kind of protections, or maybe even makes seduction easier. It was made by dwarves. It does something. I think she just likes it because it's pretty. Can't a girl like pretty things? She also possesses a cloak of falcon feathers, which allow its wearer to transform into a falcon and fly across the 9 realms. She's often seen lending this cloak out, usually to Loki while he's trying to solve a problem that he's caused. I've always liked the way that various mythologies draw a line between themes of sex and war, often presenting them as 2 sides of the same coin. Love and hate, the 2 opposite ends of passion. And Freyja is a brilliant example of that trope, even if the surviving poems and stories fail to truly explore her in a fully satisfactory way. With her overt femininity and sexuality, you can look at the way she weeps and pines for her husband, and the way she often finds herself laying with other men, sometimes as a means of bargaining. And you can look at her obsession with romance stories and fondness for pretty things, and come away with a certain view of her as a bit of a slag, which is why the Christians really didn't like her when they moved into Scandinavia. But despite her proclivity for laying down with many different people, the way she does it is empowering to her, because it's always on her terms. She doesn't serve the men around her. She wields sex like a form of magic, using it to further her goals and fulfill her desires, whether they be carnal, romantic, or material. I mentioned the abundance of stories in which some Jotun demands her hand in marriage. Often they're blackmailing the gods in some way, but Freyja always refuses regardless, forcing the gods to find another solution to the problem. Not even Odin himself can force her into anything. She controls her own fate. And Asgardr itself quakes beneath her when she puts her foot down. Even if the stories fail to truly demonstrate it, clearly she's powerful enough to be feared. She's not the sloppy harlot the Christians make her out to be. At the end of the day, what she does is no different to what any of the male gods do. She is their equal, but in her own way. She stands just as, if not stronger, than her male counterparts, without having to become exactly like them, being able to keep those feminine qualities that she's best known for. Because Seidr, in Norse culture, was a womanly practice. It's feminine to cast spells. I do like the idea of women being inherently more magical than men, and it is something I truly believe in. It's a good metaphor for power outside of brute strength, and combining that with the sexuality and passion that Freyja also embodies, you really get a good view of the power a woman can possess. In today's day and age, we've kind of lost sight of the magic held within femininity. Often, we only find ourselves describing a woman as strong when she is capable of doing what a man can do. But that's not what strength is, what empowerment is. Strength isn't in becoming like someone who is strong, but in finding the strength already residing within yourself.